Deneen, welcome back.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be back.
So I know you've been doing some home remodeling. What's the latest?
That's true. Yeah, it's an ongoing project in a series of projects. So yeah, we're working on the third floor of our house right now. So
It's a pretty old house, right?
yeah, it's about 125, 130 years old. So depending on what records you look up. So always something to do here for sure.
Wow. Did you find anything that you didn't expect? Like you removed a wall or pulled up a board and there was like some 200-year-old watch in there or something like that?
I wish we found something that was that interesting, but we did find really some cool, like old photographs of,
Oh, wow. That is
yeah,
cool.
like old photographs of portraits of people that used to live here and things like that. So that was really cool and interesting, but, no, like, treasures of, money or valuable watches or anything like that. So
Well, your
I'm
mind,
still
I
finding
didn't
all
think of
the,
that. I didn't think
yeah.
of the big chest of gold in the attic. That would have been pretty cool, right?
Yeah, typically it's the floor is out of level, or there's a big hack in the joist, and it's going to cost more money than we thought it was going to. So
Yes, you found negative money by doing
that's
that.
right. That's
It's
right.
funny. I remember as a kid, I grew up in Tahoe, and there was some old abandoned silver mines, mostly on the Nevada side of Tahoe, and we used to go spelunking, rappelling down into them, which are totally not supposed to, and it's super dangerous, so nobody should ever do it. But we were dumb, and that's what we would do,
Yeah.
and in hopes of finding treasure. And one time we found these bags, and there must have been 50 of these bags just stacked on the side, and they were heavy. And we're like, what? Could this be bags of silver?
Yeah.
We're all excited. They were like core dirt samples that they're
Oh,
using.
geez.
So not quite as good.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So let's talk aviation industry. You were with General Electric, and now of course you're with United. How long have you been in the aviation industry?
So I started my career actually at GE Aviation. So that was about 19 years ago. Started at GE Aviation in various technology roles. At GE you move around a little bit. So moved to different businesses, but then came back to GE Aviation. So majority, almost over half of my career at GE was spent in the aviation business. I spent probably over 6 years as the global CISO for GE Aviation there. So, and then just started at United about 5 months ago, 6 months ago, right at the beginning of 2020.
That was the best timing ever.
Yeah, yeah. I thought 2020 should have been the golden age of flying. You know what I mean? It should be like for commercial aviation, you had, if it was any time, you had great new aircraft coming out, advances in technology, it was booming. And then of course, COVID-19 hit and changed everything. But,
Yeah, I remember before COVID. So we had talked before. I did a few 100,000 miles a year. So I was at the airport a lot. And my biggest gripe lately was, because I live in California, I've got to get the new Golden Seal ID official government certified driver's license,
sure.
right? Or I have to carry my passport. I'm like, oh, what a hassle. Little
Yeah.
did I know 2020 was going to hit, and everything changed. And, so yeah, definitely a turbulent time. So well, I have a couple questions about that, but the first one is,
Sure.
You're the new CISO on the block. What's that like, with, not a small company and not an industry that people would consider not being complicated.
Sure.
What's it like being the new CISO at United?
Sure. Well, being from the aviation industry, I have an understanding of the business and the risks associated. It is a little different coming from an OEM, an original equipment manufacturer supplier, to an operator. An airline operator is a little bit different. When you're on the what we call below the wing in the industry, you're concerned. Well, everybody's concerned about safety. So number one, always safety. So even in terms of cyber, we think of it from a cyber safety and cyber assurance. So that's the same. But coming from the GE Aviation is an engineering and technology company, so our risks were really focused around IP protection and data data protection in that sense of the word. So in that sense of the risk. And, the threats were a little bit different, really heavy focus on insider threat and IP protection, whereas United is more focused on the consumer and data, consumer, customer, and data protection, because that's really where, a lot of the digital aspect of the business, right? Digital is where we generate revenue. So you have to make sure that you are protecting that transaction and the consumer data. So, you're dealing a lot more with cybercrime and that type of threat. So it's a little bit different. But, in general, the goals are really the same. It's just to make sure that you are securing the business outcomes and objectives, right? So, I mean, that's really what I'm here to do. But, transitioning to United, it's good. The culture's great. The business is great. It's a really well run business. Yeah. And it's a great airline. When you think about it, I spent such a long time at GE and GE Aviation in particular, because I was really connected to the mission of the organization. We were inventing the future of flight, and we were lifting people up and bringing them home safely. When you think about United's mission, they're, connecting people and uniting the world. And now, we're connecting people and we're connecting the world safely, right? So, having that connection to that purpose and that mission, it's been, that's really what drew me to the role in the organization. So it's been good. It's been a good transition. I can't say that it's like, you come in, are trying to get to know people, get to know the business, and then full launch of, crisis response. But that's been interesting.
Yeah. But it should be all smooth sailing after that.
Yeah, I hope so.
So just out of curiosity, is sort of your umbrella of responsibility, does that include like the United app? Does that include the computer systems on board the aircraft and back-end reservations? Is it that expansive?
Yeah, so I'm responsible for, cyber risk and assurance and compliance across our whole kind of business portfolio. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And there's a lot of, partnership, it's not just me and my team. We have to work really closely with all aspects of the business and partnerships there, especially when it comes to, aircraft cyber assurance and safety, because, the aircraft, that's a little bit different, and there are specialists and
of course
the FAA and airworthiness and certifications and things like that have to be maintained, and that's a specialty that engineering has to do.
Yeah, sometimes when I'm sitting on the airplane and they're rebooting the computer systems, and I watch the little Linux kernel kick in and go through the boot up process, I get to geek out. It's like, I know what this is. I'm telling people. Yeah. No. So you came in, the pandemic's first, and then of course, some protests and things like that happening as well. How has that impacted your day-to-day, the day-to-day of your organization and how you operate?
Yeah. So I think, from my perspective, coming in as the kind of new CISO, right, it really accelerated, I think, my approach to kind of understanding, assessing the gaps, right, and understanding what the business priorities were, and then responding to them. So, we had to, of course, like everyone else, right, respond to the whole remote work from home, but also, and we did a lot of the same things everybody else did, right, like, stand up, and VPNs, and increase capacity and harden our endpoints and do all those types of things. Yeah. But also from a business perspective, we had to change our business model, right? And cybersecurity, again, had to play a big role in that, because again, the digital pieces of that, right? We were transacting in ways online that we didn't before, right? We were looking at our refund policies and electronic transfer credits and things like that, which we hadn't done before. And what threat models exist there for fraud and misuse and things like that. So how do we protect those? Yeah. The whole safety aspect of how do you make sure that you are how can digital actually help with a physical safe experience at an airport with like contactless check-in or bag checks, you know, like, so we were looking at biometric authentication and, you know, printing your own bag tags with your, you know, with the mobile app and things like that. So you could just scan. So, you know, cybersecurity and data protection in different ways, different threat models are all built into that. So really, you know, really quickly trying to enable the business securely to meet their objectives, to enable this new business model, this safe, you know, physical safety, which was really interesting as well too. So it wasn't always about, you know, securing the endpoints and the VPNs and things like that, but actually, you know, helping the business get what we needed to do done to ensure our customers could have a safe travel experience, and then they could, you know, we could respond to the needs as we, you know, as things changed, and they changed every day during, you know, I mean, one day it was good, the next day it wasn't, the next day there was, you know, the everything changed. Like it was, you woke up and it was a new world every day, you know, every day for a while, and it kind of still is. But
yeah, we literally went to my family and I went to have lunch over the weekend, and in Northern California a few days ago they were allowing you to eat outside, so you could do al fresco dining, and you could take the mask off while you're actually physically eating and at the table. And we got there and they had changed they had rolled it back at midnight to say, okay, we're not doing this anymore. So it's like,
oh wow,
I don't even know where to go to keep up to it. So
yeah,
I can imagine the scale of what you're doing. So,
yeah,
you know, you mentioned something that was interesting, because I've heard some other CISOs discussing this convergence of physical and logical security, and the CISO working closely with the CSO or whoever it is that's in charge of physical security. I've got to imagine that you probably spend quite a bit of time working with the groups that are responsible for physical security as well, just because there's such an overlap in your business.
yeah. There's a very strong relationship between our physical security teams, and there always has been in the aviation industry at large. So those physical security teams, you know, we share intelligence, counterintelligence, threats, things like that. I mean, safety has always been a #1 priority. So, you know, if you think about it, cyber in that sense is just another vector. So there's a good kind of infrastructure already built, and we're able to plug into that. So those relationships are kind of natural and are really, really robust. So we definitely lean into those.
Ah, very cool. Well, you know, we as FireEye Mandiant, we came out with our 2020 security effectiveness report pretty recently. There's all sorts of interesting stats and things like that. And I pulled out two that I just kind of wanted to run by you and get your hot take in terms of, yeah, you know, you've been doing this for a while in the aviation industry, and just kind of see what you think. The first one is, let's see, I printed this out so I'd read it exactly. Only 26% of attacks are being detected by cybersecurity tools across endpoint, email, network, and cloud. So essentially, we're detecting 26% of attacks regardless. Does that strike you as high, low, sound about right?
I mean, I think it sounds about right. You know, I think there's a lot of reasons why. I mean, it can be anything from, you know, there's a lot of technology out there. A lot of organizations implement technology, and they don't really, you know, I'll say configure the tools correctly to against the threat models, or they don't have the capability to turn on SSL inspection. So, you know, all the traffic is encrypted and they can't detect, you know what I mean, detect the threats, right? So
isn't that funny how we went from we're going to
yeah,
put everything over SSL to, oops, now we can't see in it, so now we have to have decryptors on both ends.
yeah. So you know, I'm experiencing a little bit, you know, of that, because there's so much technology available to solve, you know, every security problem everywhere. So, you know, when you look at how is everything put together to optimize, you know, you sometimes you get a false sense of security that, okay, once you have a tool in, you should be good, when you're not really understanding what problem are you trying to solve? Is it actually tuned? And then there's also it's not you implement it and then you walk away. You continuously have to look at your data. What is going on in your environment? What are you seeing? How's the threat landscape changing? And then tuning those policies and those configurations to change it. And then, excuse me, there's always, you know, there's always the fact too that, we have commercial tooling that's available, and commercial tools do a great job of, keeping up with threats and kind of ingesting, even commercial intelligence and everything like that. But there's always the threat actor here. If you're not doing the threat research, and you don't have the ability to kind of you do the analysis of what your entitlement is to your controls and your detection or prevention capabilities, you have a gap, right? So you're not going to be able to detect everything unless you're continuously doing that analysis to close that gap. And that's not a lot of organizations are able to do that.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned something in there that was about testing against frameworks, and there's a lot of them. SANS, NIST, OWASP, MITRE, ATT&CK. Are there some of those frameworks that you have or continue to work with, or that you see as being pretty valuable for people to look at and measure against?
Yeah, I mean, all of the ones that you had said, right? I mean, I think you have to, what you as an organization, as a CISO, you have to figure out what's good for you. I mean, there's always going to be a regulatory component around. You have to be compliant to these particular controls and these particular frameworks. But what I like to do is say, okay, what makes sense? You know what I mean? Like, what controls make sense? And it's kind of like a controls playbook for you, your organization that's kind of tuned to your, threat profile or your risk tolerance to say, okay, this is what we're going to do. And then you kind of create that to say, okay, here's what it looks like for us. And here's our standard approach. And then, of course, you can do the mappings back to NIST. I mean, pick one, or one or two. A lot of the global companies, and I've always worked for a multinational global companies, right? And you're operating in global places where you're, doing business in multiple countries. So you have to be able to, you just can't pick NIST, because then you have what about the EU, what about the Asia, what about China, what about so you have to be able to map to ISO, map to whatever it is, NISA in the Middle East, whatever. So I think just having a solid framework that you pick kind of the concepts, right, the control objectives, and then you can map to those frameworks has always been a good approach that I've been able to take.
I remember, trying to take like NIST 853 and NIST 892, specifically as it related to SIM, and sort of do the Venn diagram to look for that. And I just remember like spreadsheet upon spreadsheet upon spreadsheet to figure out, okay, when we glue these things together, what exactly do we need to do? And and those are all just under NIST.
Exactly.
My second and final stat I wanted to get your hot take on. So we talked about 26% of attacks being detected. This other stat that we discovered was only 33% of attacks are being prevented. So just a hair over what we're seeing is actually being stopped by default. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, kind of along the same lines, right? I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons why for that, and I think it's you can have the controls in place, you can have technology, you can have processes, but then there's always the drift, right? It's always that control plan. And that's what I think is that's what kind of gets you, right? You can have everything perfect when you go in, but if you don't have that like really strong continuous monitoring, or if you're relying on manual audits instead of dynamic kind of self-healing, and that's a lot of work, that's hard, and you can't do that with some of the legacy things. I mean, that's just really hard to do. So I think there's an opportunity as organizations move workloads to cloud and more kind of, I'll say, contemporary modern architectures to be able to do some of that automation and continuous monitoring and self-healing and things, orchestration, the security orchestration that's built in to kind of close that loop. But it's going to be a long journey, I think, for everybody to get there.
Yeah, I really think you hit the nail on the head. Environmental drift is such a big deal. I firmly believe there's lots of great security tools out there, and there's
Yeah.
lots of great security people out there,
Hmm.
and they probably do a pretty good job of getting things deployed. Mistakes are made, people are human, things happen, but um, the way your security is today, if you just let it sit, just with the normal ebb and flow of operations and IT updating things and network changes and
Oh
new
yeah.
patches, give it, whether it's a week, a month, or a quarter, things are going to change and change
Right.
significantly. And I
Right.
think back, one of my very, very first jobs, it was when I was in high school. I was a bagger at a grocery store called Rayleigh's. And I actually got promoted to be a stock person and actually stocked it. And I remember I'd be in there in the soup aisle, because soup, you have to stack them. You got to get everything nice and organized so all the labels are sticking out. And I'd start, and by the time I got to the end, customers, how dare they, would come by and move cans and take them. But it looked so nice as I was
Yeah.
going through.
Yeah.
That's how I
Yeah.
always imagine environmental drift.
Yeah.
What are some of the things you're doing, or maybe some of the suggestions you have for other security leaders as it relates to, how do you measure how effective your tools are and they're working, and how do you make sure they're maximized and you're actually getting value? If you spend $1 million on this tool, are you getting at least $1 million back in value?
Yeah. So I think, I mean, that's one of the things, we always definitely struggle with, right? So, um, I have an opportunity as I, come into an organization to kind of look at that. And I've actually kicked off an optimization initiative. So, that your question is kind of on point. One of the things I'm doing is taking a look at, okay, from a coverage perspective, right?
Yeah.
Like all the tools we have, what are we actually trying, what problems are we trying to solve with that particular tool? Like what controls are they covering, what threat scenarios we're covering, right? And then working not only with my team but actually with the vendors, going back to them to say, okay, are they configured correctly to meet those objectives, right?
Yeah.
And then kind of getting that baseline in place, and then putting that monitoring, those kind of monitoring in place, so those KPIs, right? To say, okay, if we're if we're looking at like from a data protection standpoint, if we have the ability to limit file uploads for certain different cloud tools, what are they and how are we blocking them, and is there any way around it, right? So measuring those kind of I'll say operational KPIs to see if they're actually doing that, right? And then balancing it against our incident data as well too, because you can have the tool data tell you one thing, and then the actual, if stuff is if stuff is actually going on, right? And then even if you can also pull in some of the stuff around, like not just your cybersecurity stuff things, but like policy violations, like from
Yeah.
an HR ethics and compliance as well too, because that tells you sometimes like, okay, your tools might not be the end all be all. There might be some process things that people are, are
Especially
doing.
for like insider threat and things like
Yeah.
that, right? Yeah.
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 No, that's awesome. Are you a proponent of the purple teaming idea, and bringing these red teams and blue teams together to work more cooperatively?
Yeah, I am. I definitely am. I don't understand the kind of drama between it, but I guess there is. But yeah, I think if you're gonna do security control validation, right, you should have the expertise and the collaboration and plans in place to be able to get those things remediated and mitigated as well too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
absolutely.
Very cool. So one of the things that I know you've been a big proponent of, and we've talked about this actually before, is developing and retaining cybersecurity talent, which is a universal issue.
Yeah.
Truly is. You've worked for and have worked for very, very large organizations, and very large organizations tend to need large teams and have some level of turnover, et cetera. How do you deal with developing and retaining talent?
Yeah, so that's a dear to my heart right now, especially kind of with the the pandemic crisis going on, right? The airline industry is one of the hardest hit. So you see in the headlines that we're we want the workforce to reduce and things like that. But in my case, that's really not true. We want to retain our cybersecurity talent. The threats are only increasing, and we want to make sure that our company is protected and we're around for a long, long time. The last thing we need is a cybersecurity event to hurt us right now. So one of the things one of the things that I always am a proponent of, right, is making sure that the work is really interesting. I mean, the problems and challenges that you put in front of people, they need to be really interesting, and you have to understand, you have to show people how they are how they connected to not only all the cybersecurity domains, but back to the business. What are you actually doing? Why is it important that we're doing these things, right? So really showing them the value. If they are, again, connected to the mission of the organization, right? Like in my case, connecting people in the uniting the world. That's why we're here. That's why we are, that's why you were up at 3 in the morning on Saturday night when you got this alert, because you needed to do this, this, that, and the other thing to do this to, protect our customer base. They get it, right? So I think, always having that articulating that connection. And then I invest a lot in actual training. So cybersecurity, it's evolving, right? Every day is something new, and you can't rely on, even the course you took a year ago to say, okay, that's the way it's going to be, because that isn't. So, of course you can, always challenging folks to, raise the bar and actively learn new things. But I actually, I always make sure that I have enough budget and enough, enough leeway to send people where they need to go to train, because I think that's really, really important to do that.
Yeah.
And then, just making sure that the lines of communication are open for people, not with, creating that inclusive and collaborative culture with the team that's based on trust. Because if you have that, people, you have that connection with the mission of the organization, and then you have that, that connection with your team, people are willing to stay, right? And yeah. I think that makes it just more real to a person than, okay, I'm here to do my job, I'm working the queue, or creating this deliverable, and oh yeah, I could go to this company and I can make 20-30% more, because that's what's happening, right? If you have to create that connection, you have to have trust and inclusiveness and collaboration, and you have to have you have to continue to invest in people, show them that you really, really care and value the work in the organization does. So I think that's been a formula for success. It doesn't always work. You have to have financially competitive, compensation packages, and we're always continuously doing that. But, you can't rely on that on its own to retain talent.
Well, one of the things I really like what you said, I've heard a lot of people say, well, this person's on the network security team, but we're going to expose them to AppSec and DataSec and other things and other, IT or security related options. And that's always important. But you said you're taking it to the next level. So, you're part of a bigger business story, right? The goal of the company isn't to be secure. I mean, security is something that's needed, but at the end of the day, you're trying to run a business, right? And you're trying to, facilitate things for your customers, et cetera, and your shareholders. That's really key. And I think that's something that's missed so often, and people just get in their little lane and they feel comfortable there, and they're not really exposed to those other areas. And I think it also puts a person in a situation where, one, they're not as effective, and two, it really hinders their ability to grow and mature in their career. And if they would like to go, like you, go up through a leadership role, juxtaposed to maybe just maintaining more of a technical role. Both are great, but at least now they have the option.
That's right. Yeah, and you have to figure out how to enable the business. There might be some, cybersecurity risk is always going to be a business trade-off, right? I mean, there's some things that, if I was looking at it completely from a technology standpoint and a cyber security risk standpoint, based on the intelligence and the threat modeling, I would be like, I don't think we should do that. No. But, based on what the revenue opportunity and the market opportunity, whatever it may be, right? It makes sense to do it. So how do we do it how do we mitigate the risks that the business or business would encounter, right? And able to do business in the way that they want to do it. So that's really what you have to be able to get your team to understand.
Yeah, because you might see something as a security analyst, and to you in your world the sky is falling, and maybe rightfully so, but that's just one flavor of risk that the executive team and the board needs to review, and they're reviewing 5,000 other different types of risks as well.
That's right.
Some of which may be worse.
Right.
It's funny. I was talking with one of our earlier Verity customers before we even became Mandiant Security Validation, was Blackstone, and Jay Leak was the CISO at the time. And he was talking about how he uses the platform. And he said, yeah, it's great. I can validate and improve and tune and optimize and all these things for my security tools. But let me tell you why I really like it. He said, I was able to find redundant products and products that just weren't providing value, or things that were just completely out of date and stodgy. I had empirical evidence to show, okay, they're not adding value. I can rip them out. I can take that money that I just pulled back from maintenance and support and everything else and reinvest it in things I really need. And one of the things I really needed, to your point, was continuous training for my people. And so he said, some of these people, they had some vendor certifications and things like that here and there, but there was no process in place to keep their skills as sharp as possible. And they were able to do that. And I thought that was a really cool, for me, as intuitive of a use case.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So let's also talk about something else that I know is near and dear to you, which is this idea of building a security mindset, or a security business culture, if you will, in the organization. How you go about that?
Yeah, and I think that is near and dear to my heart. I think I have an advantage a little bit because, like I said at the beginning, beginning of our conversation, safety and like risk management is kind of inherent in aviation. I mean, you step on a plane, you expect it to take off and land, right, and safely get where you need to be. I mean, that's just, everything is focused on safety and assurance and things like that. So I have a little bit of an advantage of that. But when when you talk about digital, and kind of I'll say the acceleration of digital, that mindset probably hasn't trickled into, especially as we hired new people in, and you have the startup culture and stuff like that. So that's been a little bit of a challenge to say, well, we don't do it in aviation that way. You know what I mean? So that's been a little bit of a journey over the past, back at GE and here as well too. But I think it's really again, I talked about having those conversations with my team around how, what are the business objectives and how do we enable it? But it's also really, really working hard to, educate my stakeholders and the business teams and the app teams, right, around the threats and risks and situations and scenarios that are really going on and how they can help solve it. Because it's not, again, you can't operate, you can't do this alone, right? And when you go out, and you have to share the information that's happened, like what's going on, right? I think so many security teams hold that so close to the vest, like what incident, oh, we can't talk about that because it's a security incident, right? I'm probably, I'm open with that. I go and every week, if there's something going on, I share it with the digital leaders, right? I say, this is what's happening in our environment. This is why I'm asking you to look at those vulnerabilities. This is why I'm telling you not to deprioritize those in your, in your release plan, because we are actively getting, these kind of threats against us, right? So just, talking about that, or, there's, other things just on the business side, right? With, with the economic, crises that are happening as a result of the COVID-19. I mean, there's unemployment fraud scams going on. There's an increase in social engineering and phishing and things like that are impacting our employees, right? Yeah. So, working with our legal teams and our, security investigations teams to say, these things are happening. Look what's happening. How do we change our processes? How do we have an outreach with our, our employees to make sure they understand, what they need to do to protect themselves, or what, if this happens, what should they do, right? So, it's just constantly educating people so when they hear those things, they can connect the dots on their own, right? They don't wait for somebody on the cyber team to say, oh yeah, that's what you should do. And I've seen that happen already. Just in the couple months that I've been at United, I've seen people start to reach out now and say,
Oh,
hey,
nice.
I saw this. I think you should know about it, which is good. And that I feel good about that.
Yeah, no, that's really awesome. That's really awesome. No, it's good to hear that. I was wondering, and of course, share what you can and do what you can't. But I was wondering if there's any cool use cases or scenarios as it relates to how you handle threat detection and incident response and things of that nature within these, very large GE and United, these very, very large organizations that are just exacerbated by the volume of data and the complexity and the global and sort of the global footprint there. How do you deal with threats and response, just the basic blocking and tackling of here's something bad, let's get rid of it?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, we have I think a pretty good defense in depth strategy, right? So as much as we can layer in controls across the board, we do. So we do a lot of that. I think we're looking again at moving towards more of a, I can't, for lack of a better term, the zero trust type of architecture, right? To move folks more kind of off of our network and stop, kind of putting everything on us to, put the security controls in place, right? So we're doing more of that. We're trying to do more of that. And then it really comes down to, in my mind, is having two things: an Intel focused program that drives, that really informs the rest of your cybersecurity and risk program. You got to know your threats, right? You have to understand really, really what's a problem. There's a ton of stuff going on in the environment all the time, and you can't stop everything. You got to, you can't protect everything. You got to figure out what the most important thing is, right? So having Intel inform, what to detect on, what to prioritize, what controls, what preventative controls, what detective controls, things like that, right? Even from a risk management standpoint. And then, secondly, the business outcomes. You have to have that inform the program as well too. So really look at that from a threat management standpoint. So, and then, again, it's not all. The other thing too is, yes, we have a Intel team, we have a detect team, we have an IR team, we have a crisis management team, but we make sure that we're integrated with the business processes, right? With the business risk management team, with the business crisis response, right? And then
you pull in public relations and legal.
Yes. Yeah. And then as we do find things that happen, and we do find things that, detect and alert, and even if they're not, if we're blocking and stopping them, we're going back to the application teams or the infrastructure teams and saying, hey, yeah, you know what, we have a web application firewall and we're blocking these, but you know what, that's just a speed bump. You need to go and fix these permanently, because we're seeing this start to, it was fine. Now we're seeing a little bit of an increase. That means what prioritize now. Yeah. So it's not just, we're not going to always be the people who fix everything. Yeah. The app teams, it's really, security is everybody's responsibility. It really is. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's when a compensating control becomes thought to be the control.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah.
The last thing I wanted to touch on, and we briefly just kind of referenced it earlier, is insider threats. And, probably, I think most people would still argue today, one of the most challenging to deal with. Not just from a technical perspective, determining who is and who isn't the insider, but often having the right processes and business DNA in those processes to determine, well, what do I do? If Bob's doing something bad, do I go to Bob as boss? Do I go to you? Do I go to who? What's to follow? And based on what you've said about sort of this business security mindset, right? And pulling all these other disparate organizations into it. It sounds like you probably have a more mature approach, but how are you dealing with insider threats today? And what are some of maybe the big challenges there?
Yeah, I think the insider threat. I mean, it definitely is an issue. It's always been an issue in particularly in high IP type businesses, right? And then when you're in a crisis type situation where people, or there's fear, uncertainty, doubt, people start maybe not to make the right decisions, right? So, I think around insider, of course, you have to have the controls in place around, data protection or data loss prevention, whatever those may be. But you also have to have an integration into, again, your business processes, whether it's the compliance and ethics and compliance and investigation, right? Again, it's not a cybersecurity issue, that insider threat. It has to be a cross-functional type of approach, right? You have to work together to say, okay, here's what we're concerned about. Here's the risks we're looking for. When we find a risk, here's what we're gonna alert on and investigate. And when it becomes something bigger, here's how it goes through the compliance process and investigation process, and it's handed off there, and it's kind of gone through those channels and then closes the loop. Everybody's informed of outcomes, so we can always continuously improve our processes and update our controls and things like that. But you definitely have to look at it from a cross-functional approach. It just can't be like, we are DLP, we're going to look at USB and movement or email to personal accounts, and the cybersecurity team is going to take care of it. Yeah. There's a way bigger picture than that, and that's definitely something that an approach we're taking.
If anything can bring the organization together when building a process, it's trying to figure out how to address insider threat, right? Because it does touch so many groups. And I've told people this for years. If somebody tries to sell you an insider threat black box that you plug in, don't walk away, run away, because that thing ain't going to work.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Deneen, we're just about out of time, but hey, thank you so much again. This was great, and always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always a fun time. Thanks, Brian.
All right. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks. Bye.